So we are in a different area now. I didn't want to be in Truman's office, it was kind of boring. So one of the things that is probably the key element to being in Congress is actually knowing how to construct a speech and being able to give it. This is a very difficult part that a lot of people tend to struggle with. But when we simplify it down, it actually becomes one of the easiest parts and probably one of the most enjoyable things. A lot of us just get into our own heads and like to think that we don't know what we're doing, and therefore we shut down and we kind of just give up. So today I'd like to kind of discuss the structure of writing a speech and simplify it completely. So the first thing that we're going to do, I have a block of wood. We'll probably find a way to use that sometime. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I have found a purpose for this wood. I have a chart here detailing the basics of writing your speech, the structure. Very, very simplified. Most of us have written papers before for a class, so you're going to be very familiar with this format, so it's very, very easy to understand. So we're gonna take a look at that now. Transition block. Okay, so this, like I said, basic layout. I put essay at the top because this is very familiar to what a lot of us do when we write an essay. So here's the thing. This is where people get a lot of really stuck up when it comes to doing speeches. They see that it's 9 minutes long and they immediately freak out because honestly, a 9-minute speech is a lot. Now, you want to be able to talk at least 4 times during the meet, so you want about 4 9-minute speeches. Now, before you get freaked out, turn this off and never look at Congress again. Let me sort of explain this a little bit. You have your basic layout here. You have your hook, your thesis and intro, and your transition. Okay? You want that to take about 1 minute and 30 seconds. Most of that is pretty simple. So an example I like to use is bananas. Let's argue that bananas are actually very deadly for you. So for my hook, I might go, well, bananas, very delicious to some, but deadly to others. Today we will be looking at the idea, moving into my thesis, about how bananas are deadly for you and why we should stop eating them. Obviously, it's not as long as 1 minute and 30 seconds. Then I transition, then I give my evidence. So according to source 1, it says blah, blah, blah. I explain it. I explain it back to my point. I transition again, evidence 2, restate, and then review. Okay. Now, this still may seem very, very frightening and a bit spooky to try and take on. Now, this seems like a lot, okay? But what if I told you that it was not, instead of a 9-minute video, what if I told you that instead of a 9-minute speech, it's actually 3 minutes? So instead of 1 minute and 30 seconds, you're moving anywhere to 15 seconds for your hook, your thesis, and your transition at the beginning. The very end, same thing, about 15 seconds. Excuse the handwriting, it's very hard to write angled. So that right there is 30 seconds of your 3 minutes. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to go. Well, here's the cool part. You should leave about 30 to 15 seconds left for questions at the end because this shows that you actually know what you're talking about. So now instead of 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, you have anywhere from 2 minutes and 15 seconds to 2 minutes left. Well, it's really not hard to find out where those minutes go. Depending on how long you would like your evidence and explanation to be, these can be each a minute long. So instead of super long amount of time, you now have a 2 minute and 30 second speech. The reason this is so cool is because now you leave enough time for questions so people understand that you also know what you're talking about. It makes you seem very much more credible and people like to listen to you. But it also gives you 15 seconds to divvy up here if you're running a little bit slow, if you're stumbling a little bit. It gives you 15 seconds of recovery time. So your overall speech time is actually only 3 minutes in total that you'll be up there, but anywhere from 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Which, if you've ever had a conversation with somebody or watching this video, it lasts longer than 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Just talking about this simple stuff, it was very easy for me to articulate on it and to come up with a very short 3-minute discussion. And that's all you're really doing for this. So instead of an essay, You're really just writing something about a conversation, about a political topic, which, assuming that you're in here, you have a decent understanding or want to understand of politics. Transition block. Anyways, so one thing that we like to kind of split up the room when we're discussing a topic is a way to understand how a speech should kind of sound when you are in Congress. Because a big part of Congress is not only getting to scream at people that they're wrong, but doing it in a way that you sound smart. We call that a half and half speech. So the speech layout that I showed you was a very common way of doing such a speech, very good for beginners. What I encourage you to do, though, is to start out a new way that we have sort of discovered. This works really well for the middle section of speeches. First, we'll cover that. So, the very first layout I showed you is great for an intro speech. Those are roughly around your first to 4 speeches on a single topic. Evidence is being brought to the table immediately. People are going back and forth against what others have said. People argue that bananas can't be deadly because they're a fruit. Others are arguing the opposite. That's all something you're going to find very commonly within the intro speech. Heavy evidence to be debated. Then what we go into are what are the half and half speeches. What these are they are speeches where you give half of your speech as evidence, bringing something new to the table for discussion. So bananas actually can be deadly due to a scientific report that showed that some people are deathly allergic to it. And then I can refute using my other half. So instead of that second spot for evidence, I instead put in Representative Truman brought up a really great point. He argued that bananas cannot in fact be deadly due to the fact that they are a fruit. However, evidence shows blah, 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 that it can in fact be a fruit, and there have been multiple deadly fruits. So in a half and half speech, I'm going to take new evidence, add to the discussion, but also talk about what's been talked about and refute it. Try to give a sort of argument to this point. Don't argue necessarily the statistical data itself, but argue the principles of the topic. Another thing that we like to do in Congress speeches are the last bit of speeches. These are when people are starting to restate the same things over and over. Half and half speeches are kind of just going over the same arguments. These are what we call crystallization speeches. They're preparing an outro. What they are is they're basically clarifying the argument and chalking them all up to the board of what has been said on the affirmative side and what has been said on the negative side. How do you feel about this topic? How do you feel about that side? This is what both sides have said. This is what we should vote on. We need to end this discussion. That is a very good example of a crystallization speech. That's what you want. You want to define both arguments, go over a little bit of evidence on each side, and then all together pull it together and show which side you believe that you have been winning the argument using based data, refute it, crystallize it, finish it. That's where usually you will table a resolution or a bill and you'll move on to another topic. Another way I encourage you guys to write these speeches. I'm going to save you a lot of time and effort of writing out all those speeches. Following out that whole format, it can be very simple because you know where you need to write things. What I heavily encourage you to do is to follow the note card method. If you understand what you're talking about, all you need to know are your sources. It's no different than having a conversation with you right now. I could tell you a bunch of statistical data about a lot of political things I'm interested in because I know it. But I'm not going to know the sources off the top of my head because I don't have a note card for that. But I can have a conversation. And that's what you want to achieve within these speeches. So what I encourage you to do is when you are writing these speeches, instead of writing them out fully, try this for at least one speech. See how you like it. What you're going to do is you take a regular note card. Top left corner, you put whether or not this is affirming the resolution, whether you want it to pass, or a negative, whether or not you want this to fail. So an half or a neg. Then put the topic you'll be discussing. I like to color coordinate mine with colorful pens. It makes it very much so organized. Then what you do is, some people can do this. Most people like to stray away from it, but it does help. Put an intro and a hook at the top part where this evidence is. And that way they know where they're going to start with their argument. Sometimes it works, but then you can't hand that card to someone else with a bunch of evidence and data, and it's a whole another rule thing for another video. But put your source here. Put a source here, what they said. Put a source here, what they said. Put a source here, what they said, explaining the argument. So we're talking about deadly bananas. Well, I have an affirmative resolution that bananas should be banned because they're deadly. So the topic bananas, affirmation. My evidence is a scientific poll that showed how many people were deathly allergic to bananas and are affected each year. The scientist says this, and then I, as a person, explain why that is relevant to the topic. Well, if the scientist is saying that bananas are obviously deadly, why are we so keen on ignoring that data and pushing for the right to have a banana? And then I would transition, go into my second block of evidence, third block, and then, but that takes a little bit of understanding of the regular format. But I do heavily encourage you to try this. It helps keep your evidence and data very organized. And after you use it, cross it off, never have to use it again. Or I could use it all in one speech. Overall, this combined with only speaking for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you're gonna find helps really, really lessen this problem that a lot of people like to find within themselves when it comes to writing speeches. Transition block. All right, so that was the basics of writing a speech. If you're still a little bit confused about some of those things, let us know down in the comments. Another thing you can do is rewatch it. Make sure you understand it. Go back over the first format that I showed you. It'll really help you to understand the basic concept. You're not writing an essay. You're writing a conversation that uses some scientific data or evidence that you can use to have a decent conversation. One thing I'd like to mention as well is to continue. So it turns out, ladies and gentlemen, we did in fact find a use for this block, and now we're gonna.
I love the bar.
Looks fun too. 5, 4.